is really a fundamental basis of our society and legal system. And so an understanding of tax, I think, is really fundamental for any student, no matter what you're going to go on to do afterwards. First of all, you've probably all paid tax without realising it. If you've bought anything in a shop, you've paid some VAT. You may have undertaken a job, in which case you'll have paid some employment tax. Tax is the basis of any transaction. Until we understand the tax implications, we don't enter into any transaction, be that in the commercial world or even on a personal basis. From simple transaction like transfer of a property, to restructuring a company, a major merger and acquisition deal, to even dividing up assets on a divorce, the tax implications are always going to be looked at. So even if you're not a tax lawyer, but you're a lawyer who understands tax, you have an edge over your peers. Tax is really the basis of our society. Most societies can't function without it. And so understanding tax helps you to understand how the legal system fits together. What we're not aiming to do is tell you everything you need to know about tax. That's not possible in a single course. And tax changes really fast. Tax changes every year. So anything we teach you in 1 year will be out of date within a year. So really we're looking at what are the tools to be able to understand tax at any point in the future. So we learn how to read tax legislation so that at any point that you need to know about tax in 10 years' time, in 5 years' time, you're going to know how to do that. And that's really what we want you to get out of the course. So how do you read tax legislation? How do you understand what tax law is? And how do you then use case law to support that understanding? We start by looking at the UK tax system. What is the UK tax system? What does it look like? We think about some of the history that brought us to the point that we're at now. And what are some of the fundamental principles that guide tax? How do we design a tax system? What are some of the things that we have to think about before we can even start to explore? And then we move on to look at some specific taxes. We start with income tax, and we look at how do we tax employees and how do we tax those who are self-employed. What counts as an employee or someone who's employed? What are some of the principles that guide that taxation in terms of what should be taxed, what shouldn't be taxed? Should they be taxed in the same way? Are they taxed in the same way? What deductions should you get from each of those? What about difficult things like if you get paid in something that's not money? How should we treat that? And that brings us really to the end of the first semester, exploring income tax. And then we look at some capital taxes. So we'll start by looking at capital gains tax. What is a capital gain? What are capital assets? How do you decide what you bought an asset for? How do you decide what you sold an asset for? And how do we define those assets? And also we think a little bit about what's the difference between income and capital. Is that a fundamental part of our system? And we think about some of the problematic areas. And then we apply that to the particular structure of trusts. So we take the trust and we say, well, what's different about a trust? How can we think about capital gains in the context of trusts? So that's a very specific application of the tax. And then we move on to thinking about inheritance tax. What is inheritance tax? How does it fit with capital gains tax? How do those things sit alongside each other? Some of our learning about capital gains tax and trusts will be informed by what we later learn about inheritance tax. And then to wrap up the course, we look at tax avoidance. What are the areas in which tax avoidance is prevalent? What are some of the general principles of tax avoidance? And then where are there some problematic places? So for example, the issue of employed and self-employed. What opportunities are there for tax avoidance there, and how does the law deal with it? And then we think about more recent examples, so things like the gig economy. What opportunities are there within the gig economy or platform economy to avoid tax? So that in a nutshell is the tax course, and I hope to see you on it.